John Mearsheimer and I analyse global politics. We both have strong opinions. Mearsheimer sees a world driven by power and competition. He argues that states are inherently aggressive. I embrace a more nuanced perspective, historical realism. Mearsheimer's work is highly influential. He argues that the rise of China will lead to conflict with the US. I see more potential for cooperation and competition. John Mearsheimer's worldview is shaped by offensive realism. This theory paints a stark picture of international relations. States are the key actors, driven by survival in an anarchic world. Anarchy means no global authority to enforce rules. States must accumulate power to deter aggression. This pursuit of power leads to competition and conflict. States are uncertain of each other's intentions, fueling a security dilemma. This cycle can escalate tensions and lead to arms races or war. States aim for hegemony, but true global dominance is almost impossible. They strive for regional hegemony, dominating their own neighbourhoods. My approach to understanding global politics differs significantly from Mearsheimer's. I call it historical realism. It recognises the enduring importance of power. However, it takes a more nuanced view of how power operates in the international system. I believe that history provides crucial context for understanding the present. Unlike offensive realism, which focuses primarily on states, historical realism recognises the role of other actors. These include empires, networks, and even individuals. I argue that power is not monolithic. It is not just about military might, it is also about economic influence, cultural soft power, and the ability to control information. Networks are particularly important in my view. They can be economic, social, or technological. They connect actors across borders and create interdependence. This interdependence can foster cooperation, but it can also create new vulnerabilities and sources of conflict. Historical realism emphasizes the importance of contingency and unintended consequences. The international system is not a predictable machine. It is a complex and dynamic system. Seemingly small events can have far-reaching implications. John Mearsheimer views China's rise with deep suspicion. He believes that China's growing economic and military power poses a direct challenge to US hegemony in the Asia-Pacific region. He argues that China's ultimate goal is to displace the United States as the dominant power in the region. This is a classic security dilemma scenario. Mearsheimer points to China's rapid military modernization, its assertive behavior in the South China Sea, and its efforts to build economic and diplomatic influence throughout Asia as evidence of its expansionist ambitions. He believes that China's rise will inevitably lead to increased tensions and potentially even conflict with the United States and its allies in the region. He argues that the United States should adopt a strategy of containment to counter China's rise. This would involve strengthening US military capabilities in the Asia-Pacific, forging closer ties with regional allies, and seeking to limit China's economic and technological growth. Section 5. The Bear in the Room, Mearsheimer on Russia and a Multipolar World. John Mearsheimer doesn't see Russia as the main threat to the United States. He views Russia as a declining power. It is lashing out in response to the loss of its empire and the perceived encroachment of NATO into its sphere of influence. He argues that the West's attempts to integrate Ukraine into its orbit were a major strategic blunder. This unnecessarily provoked Russia. However, Mearsheimer also believes that Russia is a critical player in the emerging multipolar world. He argues that the United States should avoid pushing Russia further into the arms of China. He suggests that a more pragmatic approach would be to seek areas of cooperation with Russia, particularly on issues like counter-terrorism and nuclear non-proliferation. Mearsheimer's views on Russia are controversial. Critics argue that he is too willing to excuse Russia's aggressive behavior. They point to its annexation of Crimea, its support for separatists in eastern Ukraine, and its meddling in Western elections as evidence of its malign intentions. Section 6. Ferguson on China. A revisionist power or a partner in progress? I am less pessimistic than Mearsheimer about the prospects for US-China relations. I recognize that China's rise presents both challenges and opportunities for the United States. On the one hand, China's growing economic and military power undoubtedly poses a challenge to US primacy. China is a revisionist power. It seeks to reshape the international order to better reflect its interests. On the other hand, I believe that there is still potential for cooperation between the United States and China. We share common interests in areas like climate change, global health, and nuclear non-proliferation. A complete decoupling of our economies is neither feasible nor desirable. I argue that the United States should pursue a strategy of constructive engagement with China. This would involve a mix of competition and cooperation. We should compete with China in areas where our interests clash, such as trade and technology. We should cooperate in areas where our interests align. Section 7. Ferguson on Russia, a disruptive force but not the Soviet Union reborn. I agree with Mearsheimer that Russia is a declining power. However, I believe that it remains a significant disruptive force in international affairs. Russia, under Putin, is driven by a deep sense of resentment towards the West. It feels humiliated by the collapse of the Soviet Union and the loss of its empire. Russia has shown a willingness to use military force to achieve its objectives. We see this in its interventions in Georgia, Ukraine and Syria. It has also engaged in cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns and other forms of hybrid warfare to undermine Western democracies. However, I disagree with Mearsheimer's assessment that Russia is not a major threat to the United States. Russia's actions in Ukraine have demonstrated its willingness to challenge the post-Cold War security order in Europe. Its nuclear arsenal and its ability to project power into the Arctic and the Middle East make it a formidable adversary. Section 8. Clashing over NATO. Expansionism versus strategic restraint. John Mearsheimer and I have sharply contrasting views on NATO. Mearsheimer argues that NATO expansion after the Cold War was a major strategic blunder. It antagonized Russia and created unnecessary tensions in Eastern Europe. He believes that NATO should have been disbanded after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I disagree with this assessment. I believe that NATO expansion was necessary to provide security and stability in Central and Eastern Europe. The countries that joined NATO after the Cold War had all experienced Soviet domination. They were eager to join the Western Security Alliance as a way to protect themselves from future Russian aggression. Mearsheimer argues that the United States should reduce its military commitments to Europe and focus on the Asia-Pacific. I believe that this would be a mistake. A strong US military presence in Europe remains essential to deterring Russian aggression and reassuring NATO allies. Section 9. The liberal international order, can it endure? John Mearsheimer is deeply skeptical of the liberal international order. He argues that it is a tool of US hegemony designed to maintain American dominance. He believes that the liberal international order is in terminal decline. The rise of China and other powers is shifting the global balance of power away from the West. I am more optimistic about the future of the liberal international order. I believe that it has proven to be a remarkably resilient and adaptable system. It has survived the Cold War, the rise of globalization, and numerous other challenges. However, I recognize that the liberal international order is facing serious challenges. These include the rise of populism and nationalism, the erosion of democratic norms, and the growing threat from climate change. Preserving the liberal international order will require a renewed commitment from the United States and its allies. Section 10. Navigating the storm. Contrasting visions for US foreign policy. John Mearsheimer and I offer starkly different visions for US foreign policy. Mearsheimer believes that the United States should adopt a more restrained and realistic foreign policy. He argues that the United States should focus on preserving its own national interests. It should avoid costly foreign interventions. He advocates for a strategy of offshore balancing. This means relying on regional allies to counter potential threats. I believe that the United States must remain actively engaged in global affairs. It should work to maintain its leadership role in key international institutions. We should continue to promote democracy and human rights. This is not about imposing our values on others, it is about upholding the principles that have underpinned global peace and prosperity for decades. The debate between Mearsheimer's realism and my own brand of historical realism has profound implications for US foreign policy. It reflects a fundamental divide over the nature of the international system, the role of power, and the best way to safeguard American interests in a turbulent world.